All right, guys, bang, bang. I have Balaji here with me. Thank you so much for doing this. I'm super excited to talk to you.
Cool. Good to be here.
For sure. For those that don't know who you are, you've got a lot of relevant experience, and I know that you are not a fan of credentialism, but maybe just give us a couple of data points just on your background and training so that people can understand the perspective you're coming from.
Sure. So my background, you know, Stanford PhD in electrical engineering, also have an MS in chemical engineering. I taught computer science and stats at Stanford for several years. Started a genomics company, which I was CTO and co-founder of that. Ended up being sold for $375 million. I was angel investor in Soylent, Superhuman, Lambda School, Cameo, Bitcoin, early in Ethereum, Zcash, other kinds of things. Also, was a venture capitalist at Andreessen Horowitz, multi-billion-dollar venture capital firm. Helped boot up what became parts of our bio and crypto funds. I taught a MOOC course with 250,000 students worldwide back in 2013. So, being an educator as well. And then within crypto, done a bunch of stuff. I'm an investor in lots of crypto companies and coins and whatever. But most recently, I took over one of our portfolio companies, long story, which I wrote about, turned that around, turned it into earn.com, got that to profitability, sold that to Coinbase, was CTO of Coinbase. While at Coinbase, did a bunch of stuff, but in particular, a few headlines took Earn and integrated into Coinbase, so Coinbase Earn, which has done several $100 million in sales from 2018 to 2019. It's on the homepage of Coinbase if you tried it, right? So, helped launch USDC, our stablecoin, which has done very well. Drove all the asset addition and so on there. All of this is obviously with a team of folks and whatnot. Brought on billions of dollars in assets for custody and basically just did a bunch of stuff there. And then since last June, I've finally taken the first time off that I've had in more than 10 years or whatever. Because I can't, I'm not wired like a normal person to take a vacation, just because there's, you're either doing something or you're not doing it. And if you're not doing it, it's much easier. Then you don't have, it's like a homework assignment or whatever when you're a kid and you have something due on a Christmas break. And, so I can never take like a normal vacation, but took time off, first time in a long time, and basically just, did math. I do math and I program and I angel invest and whatnot. That brings us to the present day, I can take from here.
For sure. Before we get into the fun stuff, what's the biggest surprise or learning you've had from taking time off? Like the thing you didn't expect to walk away with or learn during that time?
I think I was surprised at how easy it is to like the time passes fast, actually. You wouldn't kind of think that. So yeah, it's not like a learning or anything like that, but rather unless you go after things with the same discipline that you have when you're an operating executive, it's easy to just lose a week, lose 2 weeks or whatever, which is fine. You don't always have to be super efficient on everything. But that was just something which I hadn't had time off in such a long time that I hadn't realized that. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. You were one of very few early on that identified the potential issues with the coronavirus and were quite vocal about, hey, this is serious. This may come here. Here's potential implications. Frankly, we all now know many people, one laughed, two literally disagreed publicly. There was articles written, kind of the whole 9 yards. You've been vindicated, kind of in a weird way of nobody wanted this to happen, but at the same time, you were able to kind of warn people, if you will. What is your evaluation as we sit here, kind of mid-May, of just what's transpired, right? We don't have to go in tons of detail. People obviously know a lot of this, but just kind of what's your general evaluation of that health crisis?
So, I've tweeted some of this, and I'm writing a bunch of long form stuff, which I will drop at some point. Act One was and is the virus crisis, which is ongoing. Act Two is the financial crash, and Act Three, I think, is the crisis of our institutions. And I really think that we are in for some crazy stuff. I, you know, I think I called some of these aspects actually pretty early on, but I think the new political axis, or whether you want to call it trade-off axis or what have you, worldwide, is um, antivirus and pro-freedom. Okay, so those are like kind of like the two poles. You might call it the total state versus market anarchy. Okay, and so what's kind of going on here? So we're in the middle of this huge political realignment where old issues just don't matter as much, and things are rotating, and new coalitions are forming, even if there's some old party labels or things like that. And I think you can identify those two camps as centralization versus decentralization, as modern monetary theory versus BTC, as the state versus the network, as kind of mandatory versus free, and health versus wealth. Okay, it's actually interesting to think of those as kind of opposite poles, in the sense that the state is the actor that is now pushing quarantines, and it's enforcing stay-at-home orders, masks being mandatory, all the type of stuff. And there's a genuine argument for it, in the sense that many predispositions, or presuppositions rather, that people have about, okay, my neighbor can do their thing and it doesn't matter so long as it doesn't affect me, completely break down in a coronavirus world, where if your neighbor is not taking precautions, you very well could get sick. And so you have an interest in their health in a way that you just didn't before. Now, in a sense, arguably that's good, because, okay, well, I have an interest in their health. I will help them stay healthier and keep myself healthier at the same time. You can make an argument from a skin in the game or alignment standpoint that, a community of people who care about each other's health will probably be better. Just like, you're part of a fitness club or whatever, and people lift together, and that's actually good, right? But let's call this one axis, right? The total state. And that's, the lockdown of Wuhan. That is the, surveillance of folks who, with yellow and green and red codes, not just in China, but other places. That's price controls, et cetera. Okay. Now, on the other side is market anarchy. And this is essentially the polar opposite of that. And this is, to caricature it in extremis, it is, don't wear a mask, or I should have the choice as to whether to wear a mask. It is, like the laws are necessarily bad, everything the state is doing is wrong, et cetera. And, but the good aspect of it is, look, we're going to need to decentralize, we're going to need to encrypt, we're going to need to protect privacy, and we're going to need to have a free market, because the state may protect health at the expense of wealth to such an extent that folks are giving silly orders, to seize masks, to seize hand sanitizer, to impose price controls, to ban people from selling things at Walmart and Target, to stop Uber Eats from doing things. Elizabeth Warren even proposed like banning M&As or whatever over a certain size. Those things have nothing to do with controlling the virus whatsoever, and they're things, and of course, printing trillions of dollars, right? So there's legitimate abuses and failures on the side of the total state that the kind of anarchy pole will correct and push against. And I think either of these two poles is probably bad, but not probably is bad. What's interesting is how many different permutations and so on there are in the center. It's like a very, there's a number of different combinations and things you can do. Okay, and I'll give some of them. So many different countries, it's almost like the ideologies that they had almost didn't matter, and now they've just executed in totally different ways. For example, Sweden and New Zealand, you would have clustered them together ideologically before this, but they've taken polar opposite policies, where Sweden has basically taken a let it rip policy and New Zealand has controlled the virus. The US and Australia, you might have clustered them, and Australia has contained the virus and the US is, not, right? But then even more than that, to give some sense of where society ends up, you could have a Chinese authoritarian state. You could have a Taiwanese democratic state that didn't even have a lockdown, but has managed to mostly keep the virus under control, or actually not mostly, seemingly totally. You could have, a New Zealand policy, which is democratic, but also did a lockdown and got the virus under control. You could have Sweden's policy, which had no lockdown and is letting the virus go crazy. Or you could have America's policy, which is kind of a cargo cult, half-ass lockdown, and then combined with letting the virus go viral. So it's like at least 5 different combinations, Taiwan, China, New Zealand, the US, and Sweden. And then there's a 6th, which I think is emerging in the US, which is the snow crash strategy. And I think this is actually where the US is probably going to land up, where some combination of snow crash and Ready Player One. The state has failed. It is actually not capable of doing the blocking and tackling. If it had any, tricks up its sleeve, we would have seen them already at this point, right? There's no crack military unit. There's no, special forces or, super vaccine. There's nothing like that. There's no Area 51. There's no Manhattan Project. No one's coming to save us. So once you realize that, that's actually, it's something where it's completely the opposite of the movies, in Contagion or in, any movie, there's that's the biggest thing that Contagion, the movie, got wrong, that the CDC was going to be competent, right? And I'm not saying the CDC is completely incompetent. They've done some things right. Some of the studies they've done are fine, but they are not actually able to control a disease, and they're the Center for Disease Control, right? So where I think we land up is some combination, and I'm not endorsing this, by the way, but I think, there's a few possible scenarios where the US lands up. So one is, and these are not mutually exclusive, but let's call it Snow Crash, Ready Player One. And then someone else actually said Asimov's like Naked Sun or Solaria is also another one, right? But let me go through these. So Snow Crash would basically be where the state can't protect people. For example, Amazon is doing like mass testing of all its employees. It's developing all of these technologies to essentially turn Amazon's campus into a green zone. And potentially that becomes an export where they can export that to other corporate campuses and other communities. It's like the natural extension of Ring and some of the other products that they sell, right? Where you basically keep the virus out with multiple layers of defense. Everything, the most extreme would be like negative pressure air rooms, but hand sanitizer, gloves, all that type of stuff. Then, so basically what that is a corporate, individual, and community imposed order that controls the virus and keeps it out of your campus. But, the commons are a tragedy, okay? Then second is Ready Player One, where there's serious proposals to print $2,000 a month for everybody, if you've seen that, right? And if that proposal goes through, and I think it might, you have a scenario where everybody is sitting at home and they're receiving $2,000 a month. And that's money, which, see, the thing is, I think we're going to see both deflation and inflation. Deflation in the price of all the things that people don't want anymore, like air travel, or, well, actually, air travel's tricky. I'll come back to that. Let's say concerts, events, things of that nature, right? People will slash prices to try to bring folks in. But then you look at price inflation of things people do want, like masks, hand sanitizer, other type of things, right? And once you get soaring prices, here's where the crypto stuff comes in, or one of the many angles. You have soaring prices for masks, for hand sanitizer, and pulse oximeters, all the type of stuff to deal with the disease, as well as for things like food, consumer staples, because you've suddenly injected a huge amount of printed money, and capacity supply is usually flat or down because people are staying at home, because supply chains have been disrupted, because folks overseas aren't shipping as much stuff, and so on. So you have like much more money and flat or down supply. Well, and you have demand, right? Prices are going to increase, which we've seen, for masks and hand sanitizer, right? So then once you have prices soar, many states will impose price controls, which will cause shortages, and or they will prevent the sale of some of these things. And eBay and other places have actually already prevented the sale, I believe, of masks and hand sanitizer. And again, and I'm using it as a placeholder for a lot of other things that people would buy. At which point, markets go dark, and you start to get the crypto economy, things like Open Bazaar and so on become important because you can't buy the stuff on an above ground market, like a mask or whatever is like hard to buy an N95 mask. And you can make the argument like people shouldn't be able to buy those masks; they should only buy a surgical mask or whatever. I understand, right? But the demand will be there that people will want to buy those things, and they'll want to buy food, and they'll want to buy consumer staples and whatnot. And so, essentially this printed money that they get will be, I think, useful for three things. One, maybe it'll pay the rent. Maybe there'll be some price control imposed on the rent or something like that. Two, maybe it'll buy food. And three, it'll pay for internet stuff, which is probably the most, like something like Dropbox is probably going to have the least problem when, if there's significant inflation, because their gross margins are so high that the marginal cost of delivering another Dropbox thing to somebody is not that high, right? But then you have this Ready Player One world where people are basically staying home and being paid to play video games or just surf the internet, right? And they just don't go out, but consumption is dropped off a cliff. And then the third model is this naked sun model where folks go out to rural areas and work remote from there, and they kind of have a natural social distancing built into it. And they just socialize over the internet for the most part, other than being with, like obviously they're probably with family members. Maybe there's some friends who move out there, but it's like more like a rural life, like a lot of people used to live in the 1800s in the US. You just relatively low population density. And maybe you put on your VR headset, or you otherwise connect that way, but you have just greenery and so on around. It's kind of a beautiful landscape, right? So I'm not saying all of those, those are not mutually exclusive. All of those could happen at the same time. But we start to get a future that in the US that looks very different than what is happening in green zones that have managed to keep the virus under control. Well, anyway, let me pause here because that was a long kind of burst, but I want you to get in a word in. Go ahead.
No, I think keep going. The big thing that I would just, if you can clarify, sure. So I think part of what you're talking about is like a decentralized response and then the state response, right? And those two things are somewhat counterbalanced to each other. But it's not also, I don't believe you think that it's a complete blanket in even a country, right? So right now, I think most people would say, hey, the East has been very, very good from a centralized standpoint. And part of that is because the population buys into those centralized governments. Here in the West, there's a little bit less of that kind of buy-in. And so people are maybe somewhat wary and also kind of have this democratic view of like the government is one voice, but we also have a voice. And so that has been somewhat of a more decentralized response. I've seen you talk a lot, though, like it isn't just country by country. You actually may get a breakdown even further than that at the state, county, maybe even the city level. So kind of keep going on that thread, but just
totally. Yeah, sure. Should I address those points? Yeah. So one very important high level thing I think is so two important high level things. In my personal preference stack rank, and other people may differ on this, but at least I think I am consistent, or what I say is consistent given this implicit value set, right? Which is, or not even implicit, I've been very explicit about it, which is I would rank like a competent centralized state like Singapore. I think that delivers the best quality of life. I know Singapore is trying to get, Corona under control and so on, but a Singapore, a Taiwan, a South Korea, and now this gets to my second point, a New Zealand, an Australia, right? They have managed to get the virus under control. So it appears, so is Slovakia. I think Estonia has, I think Israel has, right? These are places which, I think will provide, those are like, that's the best answer, like a competent centralized state for something like this. Then a distant second is the decentralized response, the snow crash response, where in the absence of a competent centralized state, if you have an incompetent or even worse, a malicious state, the decentralized response at least allows you, your community, your company to get it together, right? If you have a hapless government, what's happened is the government has now, by not doing a good job of keeping the commons free of this virus, it's like a tax on every transaction that's happening there. It's basically like an out of control fire that's burning because the fire department can't put it out. Because the CDC can't control disease, because the FDA hasn't approved tests, we have this viral fire burning that has imposed a tax on every transaction, right? Okay, so then at least allow individuals to put out the fire in their own little zones. That's a decentralized response. And then the worst is like the incompetent or malicious, and you can always argue which is which, but I do think there's a distinction. Malicious is like North Korea, right, or something like that, and incompetent is simply just much of the U.S. unfortunately, right, and frankly the UK, France, Italy, Spain, even Germany, right. Basically, Western Europe, the US, and Canada have actually had some of the worst responses to this, which I can get into. And so when you've got an incompetent centralized state, they're doing things like infinite lockdown with no plan, right? And that's stupid, right? Like, one way of thinking about it is every country that is doing lockdown, whether they admit it or not, is copying China. Because China did it first, and it was like, oh my God, I can't believe they're doing this. And at first there was a lot of, oh, they would only do this in an autocratic and crazy society, et cetera. Then people basically ignored the virus while it was spreading through China and then Iran. And it was only when it hit Italy that actually people are like, wow, like it could actually hit here, not in a third world country. And I'll come back to that point, by the way. China is not a third world country. That's what I think one of the biggest issues that people in the US, especially I think on the East Coast, had, is they still have a time warp model of China from like the 70s as, a primitive country, or, oh, it would only happen over there, blah, blah, blah. And it's simply not, right? It's a very sophisticated place in many ways. And I'm not saying it's all good, but I'm just saying to appreciate that. Anyway, once it hit Italy, and Italy went into lockdown, then in mid-March, the US copied Italy. And so you're copying a copy without admitting you're copying. And whenever that happens, I mean, you're in tech, right? Like, as a product manager, if you're copying a feature from another company without admitting you're copying that feature, you get like a Zune kind of experience. Remember the Zune versus the iPod, right? Or you get like early Bing is actually okay today, but like Bing versus Google, you're just having an ersatz, version of the same, right? And one mental model is you have this you have this very agile state, that is able to execute this kind of lockdown, and then you have this lumbering American, or Westerner who tries to follow the same gymnastics and simply can't do it, right? And so it might, when you're talking about like how the Chinese executed lockdown, or how, it's being executed in other places, it's not just, oh, everybody go stay at home. It's like 100 things they were doing. For example, centralized quarantine, right? They set up these field hospitals, but they built these things in 10 days. And the hospital they built in 10 days wasn't like the thing in the Javits Center. It was a hospital that had negative pressure rooms. I mean, the Javits Center, look, it's fine that they built it. I'm not taking anything away from it. But the Liangshan hospital that was built in China had negative pressure rooms. It had telemedicine for doctors to come in remotely. It had drone delivery bots. And it was basically set up so that you could remote operate the hospital, and the patients weren't, exposing like doctors to the virus, because healthcare workers were dying over there, right? It was stuff like, drones with thermal imaging cameras. It's stuff like, mobile CT scanners that are very high throughput that can just scan a bunch of folks. It was simply a technological feat where all the levers of both technology and policy were applied at the same time. I wrote a blog post on this, by the way. I tweeted it like, a piece of it was, Chinese government's guide to containing the virus. It was like in V7. And again, to be clear, I'm not saying, oh, China is good and moral or anything like that. I am saying that insofar as you're copying a copy, you should at least understand what it is you're copying and what it is you're doing. And what happened was in China, the lockdown was executed, and I've tweeted about this also. You can see my tweets in March on this, but in China, the lockdown was a top-down thing that was executed by the technocrats running the Chinese state. In the US, lockdown was like a bottom-up cry from Twitter, from like all these academics or engineers or whatever. Like Tomas Pollo, he wrote a great article, like this hammer and dance. He's like a random guy, right? And he's fine, he's smart, right? Like I'm glad he wrote the article and so on. But this is something where it's rear wheel drive. The smart people are not in our press and state. These people literally can't divide. Like, I don't know if you saw that thing where, like Bloomberg could give everybody $1 million in the US. It's true. And Brian Williams nods at this, right? And obviously our whether it's the mayor or the governor or the president, like these folks are not they're not doing a great job, right? And so you have something where it's not just the idea, it's execution, right? And the idea is, have people stay at home and then execute all these complicated series of steps to control the virus. Well, we simply don't have the talent in our state to do that. And so that's a huge divergence and a branch point, especially relative to the past, because, 1968, the US did Apollo, right? Within living memory, basically about 52 years ago, right, the US was number one, right? It could do things that nobody else could do. It was the best at coordinating huge projects, right? It could bring men, material, everything together to get things done, right? What's happened is that the state capacity of the US since basically the, Apollo project has just fallen off a cliff. And the state capacity of China and actually India and other countries has risen over that period. And now there's like a crossing point, right? There's no way that China in 1968 would have out-executed America in 1968. But China 2020 has out-executed America 2020, as has, frankly, Taiwan and New Zealand and Australia and Slovakia and Vietnam and all these other countries. There's a website called endcoronavirus.org/countries that goes into this, right? And so it's really important to recognize that, in the same way that it was important for example, Steve Ballmer to understand that Google had out-executed them before you can actually, that Apple had out-executed them, right? He was famously in denial about this for a long time, there'd be this sort of corporate nationalism, that would happen at Microsoft, where he'd say, I tell my kids, you don't use an iPhone and you don't use Google. And that's a great way of basically blinding yourself to what's happening in the rest of, the industry. Again, not saying that you copy it directly and naively. I am saying that you understand when someone's ahead of you and what they're doing, and if you decide to clone it or you build something better, fine, but don't be in denial about it, right? Another example of this that I tweeted was, with Yeltsin, who in the late 80s came to the US, right? So this was around the time of the thawing of US and Russian relations, right towards the end of the Cold War. And Yeltsin came and he visited and he saw like a NASA control panel or whatever, right? And, he was like, we've got rockets in the Soviet Union as well. Not a big deal, whatever, right? But you know what he was really impressed by?
What's that?
It was, there was a random stop that they made on the trip home to a supermarket. And when he saw like this Randall's supermarket, okay, Randall's was just the name of the chain, he was awestruck. There's a famous photo of him like just holding up his hands in dismay. And basically he's like, because the thing is that an American supermarket had so much plenty relative to the drab Russian supermarkets. And at first he thought this was some special showroom supermarket and a fake one that, you know, he'd been brought to, because that's what the Soviet Union did. It faked everything, right? He's like, you know, this is fake or whatever. And then once he realized it was real, he realized that even the leaders of the Soviet Union, of which he was one, right? He was a very exceptional person who was allowed during the time of the USSR to travel abroad, not just anywhere, but to America, right? So even the leaders of the Soviet Union had fallen for their own propaganda about how, you know, the capitalist West was behind and so on and so forth. And the leaders of the Soviet Union didn't have the quality of the supermarket experience that a random working person in Texas would have had, right? And so he said, you know, look, if people at home knew about this, there'd be a revolution, right? And so, you know, this is something where it's so important to not have excessively nationalistic or corporate nationalism or whatever nationalist blinders on. You know, I'll give a third example. Do you know what the Meiji Revolution was?
I do not.
Okay, so that's how Japan modernized. In the mid 1800s, you know, they'd been an isolated society for a long time. And to shorten a longer story, in the mid 1800s, they came into contact with, you know, the West, right? And, you know, these boats arrived and opened up Japan as a market and so on. It's a famous kind of story. And the Japanese realized they were behind. You know, they had been isolated for so long, and, you know, here were these Westerners with all of this technology that, you know, was like just a level of magic, almost like a UFO landing level thing, right? But they were very pragmatic and very smart, and they said, look, we are going to change our national slogans, right? And, you know, gosh, I'm going to find the term for this. Hold on, yes. They changed the slogan. So it was, the new slogan was enrich the country, strengthen the military. But the hold on, I want to find they have different slogans for different eras. See if I can find it. It was it's sort of like a mission statement, but for the country, right? I think it was something like expel the barbarians and revere the emperor, right? And oh, 1 second. And then the new one was like enrich. I'm probably butchering this, but the new one was enrich the country, strengthen the military. So point being that going from expel the barbarians and revere the emperor to you know, enrich the country, strengthen the military, that's actually very different, right? The first is you know, a slogan which is about stasis, right? Expel the barbarians, revere the emperor, right? And the second is a slogan which is about growth, right? You know, enrich the country, you know, strengthen the military. And that's a radical shift, actually, right? It's a change in mission statement. And so Japan modernized, and they became, you know, that's why they, you know, they're the first, you know, non-white country to actually beat a European power. That was actually a very big deal. The Russo-Japanese War in the early 1900s, right? Which was the first time that a non-white country had beaten a white country, you know, or European majority, however you want to call it, in a war. And it was a huge thing for like colonialism to, it was one of the big things that helped colonized people realize they could win, right? And you know, like that gets into all kinds of historical stuff. But my main point on this was whether it was Satya turning around Microsoft, whether it was Yeltsin looking and seeing how behind Russia was, whether it was the Japanese going and doing the Meiji, you know, restoration. This was something where folks who were smart realized they were behind, and rather than get all outraged about someone pointing that out, they're like, okay, we're behind, how do we get ahead, right? And this actually brings us to China, which is, you know, 1978 when Deng Xiaoping, you know, took over China. It was very difficult, by the way, for him to take over China. That's a whole story. Most Americans, it's actually kind of interesting to me. this is actually one of the more important things to know. Like, how did China become rich, right? How did India become rich? Just like you'd read a Harvard Business School case study on Netflix, right, or Amazon. How did these countries turn around? You read about how companies turn around. How do you turn around a country? That's even harder, right? Much harder. And I think it has a lot of lessons for business and management and so on. Even if, again, like I'm sure there'll be the comments, oh my God, China's evil. Okay, got it, right? Fine. I may agree with you on many of these premises. Just like, the Soviet Union was evil in many ways, and yet we can discuss it in a dispassionate way that, like they did do Sputnik, right? And that was something that helped put out the space race and so on. And so, we can kind of separate those two bits, right? Okay, coming back to Deng Xiaoping for a second. He also turned around the country, right? So it's a fourth example of these turnarounds, right? Satya turning around Microsoft, Russia at least partially turning themselves around. I mean, they had a horrible go of it in the 90s with the transition to capitalism. But former Soviet Union countries like Estonia did extremely well. Poland has done well, and so on. So on net, it's probably, not probably, it is a win. And certainly Japan did well. Okay, so how did Deng Xiaoping turn around China? Well, he had a few things which have become slogans now. The famous one, black cat, white cat, doesn't matter if it catches mice. Another one was let some people get rich first, which basically said, look, I know that we're going to go from everybody equally poor to some degree of, quote, income and wealth inequality, but that's okay so long as you realize you'll get, wealthier later. And these are very compact slogans, right? Let some get rich first doesn't mean you'll never get rich. It just says by injecting the word first, it's like, okay, fine, they go first, I'll go second, but it's fine, right? Later, there's another slogan that the Chinese have, which is the backwards will be beaten. Okay, that's very important. Where there's a guy called Scholar Stage on Twitter. I may be butchering that, but he has a good article on this. But the backwards will be beaten basically means that China, it's a proud country, and during the Opium Wars and during how the Japanese invaded them during World War II, they were brought low, right, by folks outside with superior technology. And so China itself has a balance between rationalism and nationalism, right? So, and these are in tension, okay? So nationalism is, like, be proud, China is the best, et cetera. And rationalism says, hey, we may not be the best in something. What are we not the best in? Let's learn about that. Those are in tension, okay? When you combine them, you have something where you can both advance science and, strengthen the military and the country and so on and so forth. Another place that rationalism and nationalism are in tension that you're actually very familiar with?
Where?
Crypto. Because every crypto tribe, there's the nationalism of boosting my coin, and there's the rationalism of the technology and the science and the features of other coins that might be worth adopting or thinking about or looking at. Obvious example being, let's say, privacy, right? Anybody in Bitcoin should know about Zcash and zero knowledge, and that's just important, right? That makes Bitcoin better, right? And if you're in the mode of, oh, everything's a shit coin or whatever, that's just excessive nationalism, right? And not enough rationalism. Now, with that said, something I have learned over the last 6-7 years is there's more value to nationalism than you might think. Because you can, the tribalism of crypto is in a sense an extension of Mac versus PC, or Emacs versus VI. There's something about it where it's not just a technology, but a community, and it's a sunk cost. And there's something where a community gains value from expanding, because if you have 1 billion people using iOS, it's better for you as an iOS user than if there's only 1 million people, right? Which is kind of why this technology evangelism takes place I'm not saying it's like always that, quote, self-interested or whatever, but it's I think it's one of the reasons, right? And that reaches its apotheosis, or maybe not, maybe it's not zenith yet. Maybe there's more forms yet, right? with crypto, where there's a financial incentive to bring other people into your coin, et cetera, right? So that irrational nationalism is actually helpful to fight off price drops, right? To say, this is the best. I don't care what it says on the screen. I don't care what you say. I'm going to close my ears. I'm never going to sell, et cetera. It's actually kind of good to have some of those folks in the community, but not too many, because if there's too many, then you can't improve or react to anything. You'll never admit flaws of any kind, right? So, all right, let me pause there, because that's a lot of history, a lot of stuff. Yeah.
So I want to go back to the China thing in a second, but staying on this nationalism versus rationalism, it sounds like what you're saying is if you have nationalism without the rationalism, it's almost like everyone feels like, hey, we're in this together, but we're all the poor people in China back in the day, right? Like there's no ability to actually improve or change or recognize what needs to be done. It's just we're all bought into this blind belief.
Yeah, it gets even worse than that, though, because it turns into there's no growth, right? The rationalism is what provides the growth. The nationalism is what provides the tribalism. And in the absence of any growth, people fight over a zero-sum pie, because it doesn't just stay as nationalism, it becomes nationalist socialism, where, right, like those tribes, one way of putting it is, you see this dynamic on Twitter. Whatever ideology somebody may claim to have, on Twitter it becomes Twitterism, where the most extreme version of that ideology is selected for likes and clicks and so on. And the folks who promulgate that are reinforced in that by other people's social reinforcement. And it just like is this feedback loop that is kind of a radicalizing sort of thing, right? You see this all the time. And no matter what your ideology is, if it's, whether it's tolerance, well, you get FU, right? Whether it's a non-aggression principle, it ends in FU, right? These things, well, that's interesting. Non-aggression is FU. Now, of course, people say, oh, well, that's just violence or whatever. But no, it actually means civilization as well. The point of the non-aggression principle is not to go around saying FU to everybody. The point is to maintain a civilized society. And, it's something where civilization is good, even if people take it for granted, right? And oh gosh, I lost my train of thought.
So let's bring that up. Let's keep going down that path of how does that apply to China, which I think part of what you're pulling.
Okay, wait. Let me finish. I just remember my point. Okay. So the thing is that all of these ideologies become Twitterism, and Twitterism becomes zero sum, because once you have tribalistically managed to shoo off everybody, shoo off all growth, shoo off anybody that wants to improve it and so on, then you fight among other people for who is the most tolerant of them all, who is the maximalist of the maximal, like this kind of stupid thing, right? Like in this very closed loop of people where you try and find some flaw that this person had and then just attack them, right? And that's actually the trap that, China was certainly stuck in for many, many years, right? Purge after purge after purge, internal political rivalries and so on and so forth. So that's where you get tribalism without the growth mentality. And then, the flip side of it is you can also have excessive rationalism, right? Excessive rationalism, I think, is less pathological than excessive nationalism, but it basically results in you having, a bunch of science and a bunch of engineering and a bunch of cool stuff, but somebody will come and take away all your toys. It's like in Civilization. You ever play the game?
Of course.
Yeah. So Civilization, the game, if you put all your money into technology and commerce and nothing else, the guy next door with one spearman can just come in and take all your stuff, right? So if you go excessively rationalist, you do not survive either, right? So clearly there's some kind of balance here. And I think that trade-off is something that we're going to need to negotiate as a society, because it's a real adaptation. And unfortunately, I feel we're moving in the wrong direction on it, where people are becoming more irrationally nationalistic just at a time when it's actually more important to be open-minded.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So on this piece, I guess part of this is that balance, right? We talk about negotiating the balance. Is that driven from the state level, or is that something that's more bottoms up and driven by the people and who they elect into office, and kind of the people actually end up controlling that in some way?
It's all of the above. I mean, in the sense of, the state, just as one example, right? World War II, the state had women go off to war or not to actually fight, but to they were working in factories and so on. And then afterwards, there was a new normal, and women were working more frequently, right? So that was something where a centralized thing came in from above, changed behavior and preferences, and then even when that force was removed, there was still a permanent delta, right? There's still a change. So that was something where top down and bottom up, even when top down left, bottom up retained some imprint of the top down force and then kind of went on its own, right? And so I don't think it's, it's just one example, tariffs matter, right? The trade policy really matters. Immigration policy matters. Those are things that are set, somewhat top down. And we should say somewhat, because obviously outcry matters and so on as well. But, those definitely influence what is feasible bottom up, right? So I wouldn't be able to divide it necessarily, but what I would say is certainly if you feel you're in a technology space, right? It behooves you to look at every green zone that's out there and understand what they're doing, right? And then also think through, okay, what's going to happen in red zones? And so just let me define terminology here, because I'm just using it for my Twitter or whatever, but a green zone is basically a place that's gotten the virus under control. And you can be more precise and say it's a region with comprehensive testing that has no new cases in, let's say, 2 weeks or 4 weeks, right? Some time period. And the reason both those are important, a region, so a spatial region with comprehensive testing. So, because if you're not testing, then I don't believe you're a green zone, right? And no new cases, meaning you have extended a streak, right? You've been just sampling and what have you, and you really have quelled the virus, right? Okay. And a red zone is everywhere else, right? Both the places without testing, because you don't know if the virus is there, and certain the places that have testing and that have let it go vertical. So one of my theses is that green zones will actually, in general, be able to sort of let up on the state will be there, but in general, they're going to have better health, better wealth, and less of a state presence. Okay, the reason being because you've sort of managed to keep society like wobbling on a new normal, right? Rather than just have it crash, right? Conversely, in a red zone, I think you're going to get huge strain pressures where you get a series of things where viral destruction leads to economic destruction, leads to viral destruction, leads to they actually stack on top of each other, right? So for example, right, you have the serious virus. Okay, then folks, they do lockdown or a cargo cult lockdown. Okay, then they all get mad, understandably, because people are going bankrupt and so on. They come out, and some of them, unfortunately, are like, oh, the virus isn't a big deal, or just the flu, bro, or whatever, right? Don't wear masks. Boom, that leads to another level of viral destruction, right? Oh, actually, yeah, it may not kill you, but it might significantly diminish lung function for the rest of your life, or for weeks or months, who knows, right? And who knows the percentage on that yet? We don't have good morbidity stats. We have good mortality stats, or I should say, okay mortality stats. Like we know case fatality rate and so on. We don't yet know what percentage of normal people, have 8-week convalescences or who have permanently decreased lung function. We don't know the long-term effects of this thing, right? So folks who just rushed out there, oh, actually, bam, they just walk right into this virus, which is going crazy, by the way, in 50 states. And then that leads to yet another pullback where demand goes back into, people go back at home and so on. And that leads to more unemployment and more unhappy people. and that kind of stuff stacks. Now you don't have the money to go and pay for, like masks or hand sanitizer, so people get the virus more. That type of stuff, right? So you can have this really negative feedback loop, or actually not a negative feedback loop, it's a positive feedback loop in the sense of amplifying it, right? That leads to more unrest potentially. So Iran actually had some civil unrest and whatnot, right? And I mean, the biggest thing is Americans should understand that it can happen here. Just as one example, Michigan, evidently armed. Do you see this thing?
I did see it, and I think that actually Michigan was real guns, and I don't know if you saw Raleigh, North Carolina, where I grew up. There was people who walked around with fake guns. So they literally took like a piece of wood and made it look like a 50 caliber. They had an inert tube that they made look like an AT-4, rocket launcher, and they were basically doing a play on Michigan was real. We're pissed off. We're not going to go walk around with the AT-4 for real, but like, here's our almost social unrest display. And so it's very interesting to see that happening in multiple locations.
Exactly. And so I mean, look, it's this whole situation is bad on like a number of different levels, but it's something where you're getting more sci-fi movie almost every day, right? And the problem is that there's at least two analogies for what the virus is doing. And let's talk about some of the crypto implications of it. One analogy is to analogize it to an invasion. Okay, so people have talked about this. They're like, oh, is this a recession or a depression? And that's because, those are things that come to mind as, is this like the 2008 crisis or not? Because everybody lived through that. It's a reference point, right? But I think that a better analogy, I mean, this is not fundamentally an economic event. It's not fundamentally a political event. It's a biological event. It's a physical event, right? And it's like, imagine this thing floating in space and then you project it down into the XY plane. Okay.
It's basically like Red Dawn. I don't know if you ever saw the movie where
yeah.
they're sitting, right? They look out the window and all of a sudden they're getting invaded. People are parachuting into the parking lot, right? It just happens. It's not people. It's a biological incident.
That's exactly, I think it's, so with the very, very important caveat, just because I know someone will misread others, I'm not saying it's a bioweapon or anything like that. Okay. I'm not. Okay. It's a naturally occurring virus, probably with everything we know. It's possible it could have escaped from the lab or whatever. People have talked about that. I think it's a possibility, but like there's no evidence to indicate it's a bioweapon. Okay. With that said, the entire US military and NATO were basically a Maginot Line. Do you know what that is? Right? Yeah. So
go ahead. Yep.
Well, so, in France after World War I, they're like, oh, we're going to build a system of fortification. So the next time the Germans come with their trench warfare, we'll be ready for them. And the Germans just completely invalidated that, where the Nazi blitzkrieg just went around, and it was like a classic example of fighting the last war. And then the French just got defeated, right? And, the US military and NATO have been MIA in the pandemic, right? And by the way, people say, oh, Asia had SARS and they were ready and we weren't. I'm like, the US had an anthrax scare in 2001, right? Number one. Number two is, there was Ebola in 2014, right? And number three, there were actually written pandemic plans. Like Bush had something on this, DARPA has stuff. There's all this stuff that's written down. That's supposed to be like a biodefense program or whatever. It just, they can't execute on it, right? They're literally incapable of doing it. So every rogue state, every terrorist, frankly, every state in the world has seen that, all the defenses of the US, right? You have the Atlantic and the Pacific, you have all these aircraft carriers and nuclear missiles and so on, all the soldiers, everything basically just completely invalidated by the virus.
Well, here's one kind of analogy that I've thought through. So I don't know if you know this. I was in the Army for 6.5 years, and so
Oh, really? Okay.
Relatively intimate with both the expertise and the incompetence that goes on within those ranks.
Great.
Right? Just like any organization.
I'm not beating up on the military, by the way. I'm just saying that. Just go ahead. Yeah.
Well, so here's one way to think about this, right? Is one of the most successful ways to attack the U.S. military over the last call it decade or so has been actually to either use embedded soldiers. So like in Afghanistan, for example, U.S. and Afghan soldiers go out on a mission. All of a sudden, the Afghan soldiers, which are deemed friendly, turn and shoot a U.S. soldier. Right. So kind of a blue on blue type incident, but yes, they have a different uniform. They're just our ally. The second thing would be something like a Fort Hood shooting where literally it's somebody in a U.S. uniform
radicalized,
who's just radicalized and shoots.
Yep.
And so then if you go to like the aircraft carrier where I think it was a general or a colonel or whatever.
Right. So the virus extends that because you basically are capturing somebody and turning a soldier into a threat by basically.
Yeah, and so we saw this in kind of steroids. If earlier, just a couple of weeks ago, there was I'll call him the captain of the ship. I don't remember his exact name.
Brent Crozier. Crozier.
He wrote the letter and he said, look, I'm basically stuck on an aircraft carrier with a bunch of soldiers, and every single one of them is now a weapon against each other because they're just infecting each other, and I don't have the tools to handle this.
Right.
Basically, let me become not ready for war. Let me actually kind of destabilize my ship so that I can protect my soldiers and we can preserve our readiness in the future. And I think that is something just people didn't understand, people didn't think about. And when you see it happen, you're like, whoa, that could decimate an entire military force. It could decimate a lot of different functions.
A French aircraft carrier got taken down, right? And like basically, there's a sense. I mean, World War I started with cavalry. Do you know that, right? Like, actually, you're an Army guy. You know more military history than I do, for sure. But a lot of people don't know this. That's actually, it started with horses and horse charges and ended with, the first mechanized warfare, right? I have a feeling that, COVID-19 may make the era of infantry and even human-staffed, boats and so on go away. And it'll just all be a robot war. It's all drones, all drone ships, all drone everything, and it won't be human staffed. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think part of this fits into the larger narrative, just like the virus has just served as an accelerant, right? And obviously, if you had talked to people a year ago and said, hey, in the future, are we going to have more foot soldiers or more drones, right, on the battlefield? Most people would say, hey, it's going to get more automated. It's going to get more kind of autonomous and all that kind of stuff. Now, all of a sudden, it becomes, well, not only is that technology one component of it, but we actually may be rendered not as effective if there's things like this out there, right? I mean, any sort of military unit that spends lots of time together, that's like the exact opposite thing you want to be doing for, some sort of viral outbreak.
Exactly. That's right. And especially given, a few things. First is, I mean, like it's actually a pretty serious virus for at least some fraction of healthy people. Okay, we don't know the exact percentage, but for example, I posted that thing with that 45-year-old former football player, right? Or Mara Gay in the New York Times has written about her story, right? Kat Gleason is an entrepreneur, very fit. Alyssa Shavinsky, Lauren Sugarman, like these are folks who, they've all tweeted about it and what have you. There's plenty more who, I can't talk about, but I've talked to a lot of COVID-19 patients because, in tech, there's this saying, right? You look at your dashboards and you talk to customers, right? There's a quantitative and the qualitative. And it's people will often, I think, have a middle brow dismissal of talking to customers or talking to patients. They'll be like, oh, that's anecdotal. That's, N equals 1. Oh, blah, blah. And what they don't understand is every data collection starts, or not every, many data collection efforts start with a conversation like that. For example, you're looking at your dashboards and you talk to a customer and they say, oh, I wasn't able to log in. You're like, oh no, really? And then you go and you instrument that and you find 10% of your customers can't log in on mobile Safari or whatever, right? And you're like, oh my God, you were just blind to that. You were data blind because you didn't have the metric, and you didn't have the metric because you hadn't talked to customers, right? The analog of that today is folks are looking at lethality stats, case fatality rates, and they're seeing correctly, and this is important, 92% of deaths are for people over age 50, and 75% of hospitalizations are for people over age 50. And I've quoted those, stats a lot, and it's important to know those things. But the wrong conclusion is, okay, then that means, I'm 30, so I've got nothing to worry about, right? Yeah, you may not die, right? That's true. But, and so relative to death, everything is mild, okay? However, relative to a cup of coffee in person, you may not want to risk, a 10-week sickness and permanently decreased lung function, right? So like, it's where you set that bar, and the problem is people are comparing it to death, and they're thinking, oh, it's not a big deal. Of course, sure. Few things are a big deal relative to death, right? Go ahead. You're going to say.
Well, I was just going to ask, so part of this, I think, in the thing that I personally struggle with the most, and I think other people that I talk with, there's this element of like, how accurate is the data, right? And
Sure.
I got the whole conversation with, I don't think it is a fair question or a fair expectation to have 100% accuracy in the data in the middle of kind of the firestorm, right? It's kind of like you're at war, and if you said to somebody, how many bullets you got left, maybe somebody knows, but most people say, well, I got less than I had when I started, right? And they can kind of directionally. And so I think that for this,
I can give you a good answer, and I can give you my answer on that.
Okay, so I just want to understand like how important you think like exact accuracy versus directional accuracy is during this.
Yeah, so I mean, it does depend. If you're talking about the dosing of a drug, sometimes like it actually can be sensitive, right? But yeah, in general, I think directional is a way to go because we're in kind of fog of war kind of situation. With that said, there's some very high signal events, right? Wuhan happened, Italy happened, NYC happened, right? Like these are well documented. They're like basically, in late January and early February, when I was fighting off the first Just the Flu folks, right? I would basically make the following point, which was December 1st, Wuhan was a normal city. By January 23rd, hospitals were overflowing, and the city was shut down by the Chinese government. Like, you had like, you basically had the thing brought to a halt, right? Like the sickness brought the city to a halt. That's not like a flu situation, right? And then the same thing, what's that?
53 days.
Yeah, exactly. 53 days, less than 2 months, you had a city basically brought to its knees, right? And, that is simply, I mean, every single person in that city, there'd been the flu coming through before, right? So the flu thing, by the way, is it's one of these mind viruses that I think will end up killing, what it does is it increases the number of people killed by corona because it disables the behavioral immune system. It's kind of like, this thing has a stealth mode to it where, because the symptoms it produces are variable, not everybody melts down in a pool of blood like Ebola, right? Like Ebola, everyone's like, okay, that's going to kill me, and you take extreme precaution on it, right? Or like, something like 9/11, right? Like it was very obvious that things got blown up. It was very visible, right? It was very tangible. This is invisible, and it's highly variable, and you're basing everything. I mean, you're not getting close to a corona patient, right? Probably, right? You're at least not intentionally. So everything is like at a distance. And what I've realized is that if you don't trust, experts or the press, and you know what, there's unfortunately a lot of good reasons not to trust them because they've messed up a lot. Yet on the other hand, they're not, even if they, I mean, this is, I tweeted this the other day, but basically, it's so obvious, right? But I'll just say this, it's like, Democrats need to learn that experts aren't always right. Republicans need to learn that experts aren't always wrong. Libertarians need to learn that a state can succeed, and progressives need to learn that a state can fail. And those are all like almost tautologically obvious kind of things. Yet I think given some of the responses to that, it pokes directly at a few blind spots there, right? Because once you move from the Manichean ideological 0 or 100 aspect, right? You say, yeah, okay, CDC did screw up, WHO did screw up, but they're not everything they publish is wrong. You have to be able to read it critically. And then now here's the rub. The rub is most people cannot do technical diligence. If they can't do technical diligence, they can only do social diligence. And so they can only like trust something uncritically or say it's all fake. So what's happened is because our and so one of the issues also is just as our institutions have become more noticeably unreliable, they've thumped their chest harder to say how they are the truth. Great example, the New York Times literally runs an ad campaign about how it's the truth when it published a bunch of bad reporting on Corona early on, like including things that said, oh, it's all xenophobic and what have you, right? And then, you know, like it actually had some just the flu journalism in there. And then, you know, 2 months, 3 months later, it's saying it's not just the flu. Well, who would have given them that idea, right? You know, like Fox did and Recode did and BuzzFeed did and Washington Post Perspectives did and Wired did and so on. Who would have given that idea, right? And so the issue is that there'll be a real tragedy, which is folks who reasonably do not trust these institutions will find that they're not always wrong.
So
and yeah, and
really press on this component of it, right? Because you mentioned earlier, like the people in Michigan who show up with guns and
right,
are basically saying, look, we don't want to agree to the lockdown. And there's this underlying sentiment in the United States specifically around freedom, the Constitution, just don't tell me what to do, right? And that, to me, kind of feels like it bleeds into this idea of the countries or the governments there. They're not always wrong, but there is some sense of distrust, or if everything goes to shit, I'm going to take my personal freedom and I can go solve my own problem. And I think you're seeing some of the extreme examples of that when people show up in Michigan, et cetera. But at what point do we get where that becomes not the extreme and starts to seep into more of the mainstream mentality, and it leads to the ultimate failure of an institution, right? Or actually, it's not just the WHO being wrong. Sometimes people just point and say, they're always wrong. We no longer trust them.
Unfortunately, it's already there where like this QAnon stuff and, plandemic and what have you. I mean, that's some true crazy stuff, right? And it's not even it's no longer rational. It's like arguing with like a religion or something, because folks, they're not arguing in the way that I would talk to a scientist, which is here's X, here's Y, if A then B, that kind of thing. They're just on another planet, right? And the problem is people don't understand how much stuff is running, like to just keep society going, right? And if you break all of that, you're taking it for granted, right? These armed protesters and so on. Like, look, I understand that they're quote mad about the lockdowns and so on. I think that they're not really. But let's talk about that just for a second, okay? Just because it's being turned into this binary thing, and it's much more complicated than that. Okay, first, the best outcome would be like a New Zealand or Australia or Taiwan, which is a democratic country that managed to control the virus. That's going to have healthier people and wealthier people in the long run, okay? So it shows that A, it's possible, B, is achievable, and C, is achievable without becoming a police state and so on. Very, very important to know that that was possible, okay? All right. So that was possible, but the US hasn't achieved it. So what does that mean? Okay, so when you've got an out of control virus, and it's a serious virus, okay? So let's take that as a premise, because there's folks who want to say it's like just the flu or whatever. Leave that aside for now. Okay, you've got an out of control serious virus. That means, so we gave the analogy of an invasion, right? I'm going to give a different analogy, which is the power going out. Okay, so our society is explicitly premised on power, water, roads, and increasingly internet, right? And if the power goes out, you don't expect a restaurant to be able to serve the same number of customers. The oven doesn't work, for example. The lights don't go on, all that type of stuff, right? Okay. If the water goes out, you don't expect them to serve customers. You expect the state the utility to fix that. And then if it can't, you realize, okay, I need to get a generator. I need to get like a water purifier. And those, by the way, are inefficient, when they're not done centrally. A lot of the stuff is much, much, much more efficient when it's done centrally. From a power standpoint, from a cost standpoint, having 10,000 generators is just, those things aren't as good, right? Solar panels are different. I can come back to that, but let's just say in general, okay. Plus a pain in the neck, right? It's something where it's a tax, not just on your money, but it's on your time to like not be able to plug something in and have it go on. Okay. So these are utilities that we're explicitly premised on, but we are implicitly premised on the absence of serious infectious disease in the public square. Okay, I want to linger on this point. We are taking, or we, until COVID-19, took for granted the public health triumphs of the 20th century. So I tweeted this, but basically there's a review from 1976 of the conquest of infectious diseases, like a bicentennial summary, right? And it talked about all the measures, and you're talking an enormous, it was thought of at that time in 1976 as a massive social and technological achievement. On par with like getting to the moon was controlling, cholera, malaria, tuberculosis, all these infectious diseases in the United States. And this is before they had PCR. They didn't have PCR testing. They didn't have much of the technology we have today. They did a lot of it with, draining of swamps and, like sanitation, certainly vaccines and whatnot. But basically they took the problem seriously and they executed on it, and they went and eradicated or controlled a lot of these diseases. And what's happened is over the last 50 years, people have just sort of forgotten that that was ever a thing. And so that's how we have society, or many, many businesses are premised on the presence of this utility, which is public health. For example, conferences or concerts, or frankly, any large crowd of any kind, rallies, right? Or public transit, restaurants, bars, all of these things with gatherings of large crowds are implicitly premised on the public health being present. So like the power going out, you can think of the health going out. So what happens? If the health has gone out, just like it would be kind of crazy to say to a restaurant, power through and just serve your customers if the oven doesn't work. Well, if the health has gone out and the restaurant opens back up, a bunch of things happen. First, some significant fraction of customers stay home. Second, there's new costs that are imposed on the restaurant. I don't know if you saw California's reopening guidelines for restaurants, but they basically expect like Joe's Diner to implement biodefense mode. Okay. All right. So if Joe's Diner, go ahead.
I was going to say that sounds very reasonable, right?
Yeah, exactly. The state has failed, so it's a snow crash thing. All right. So number one, many customers will stay home, right? Number two, new costs are imposed on a place which is at its lowest point financially. It's just been 2 months out of revenue. It's like sucking wind. Business is down, and now the state expects it to, like, basically build a clean room around a dining table, right? Okay. Number three, workers will get sick because the virus is uncontrolled, right? So you have much more in the way of random outages. Number four, you have PR and liability risk. The moment that like your restaurant or whatever is marked a hotspot because there's a news report of someone getting it, boom, business vanishes again, right? To show that that's not an exaggeration, in South Korea, 2,000 bars were shut down after one guy, walked through five. Did you see that?
I did not.
Okay, yeah. So after South Korea opened up, okay, because they've gotten the virus under control, one COVID-19 guy walked into a bar, and he mentioned to a few, bar hopped for a night, and managed to infect like on the order of 40 to 70 people. The exact number is still being determined. 1,900 people had to be tested and traced, and 2,000 bars were shut down. One guy.
Yep.
One guy, right? Now, I'm not saying it's his fault or anything like that. He didn't know. I think he was asymptomatic or what have you, right? But this gives a sense of how when the health has gone out, a significant part of the economy is no longer economically feasible to the same extent, right? Anything based on, you go ahead.
Yes.
And the lockdown doesn't fix it, is my point, right? Unless you control the virus, you have less customers because people will social distance. You have like biodefense mode that you need to implement. If you don't implement it, then workers will get sick and people who come will get sick, and there's constant PR and liability risk. So what do I think actually happens, right? What I think happens is many restaurants will essentially, just take restaurants for a second, I'll go to other kinds of businesses. They will have to upload themselves and cloudify themselves. What do I mean by that? So the restaurant will shut down the smart restaurant will shut down its physical facility, citing force majeure, do cloudkitchens.com to set up a new backend, which is headless. And that can be, by the way, out in the middle of nowhere. It doesn't have to be a plum location. You don't care about your tables. You don't care about your chairs, your decor. Number three, your storefront becomes purely digital. You're in an app. And number four, you basically are now just delivery only. Okay, so you've digitized yourself. You've become headless. You cut off the front, right? The restaurant itself is shut down. By the way, this is another very important aspect. You could end the lockdowns. Well, that actually takes away leverage from businesses in an important way, because now it's no longer an atypical time. If it's no longer atypical time, they have to pay all their rent and other kinds of things, but now they're at 25% of revenue, right? So you've pushed them into this weird intermediate state, which is also kind of likely to kill them. And the fundamental thing, I think, is the end of the lockdowns, folks. Look, I understand where they're coming from. A lot of folks, I mean, I've never been blasé. If you look at my feed, even back to early March, when people were talking about shutting down South by Southwest and so on, right? It almost made me like throw up to think about, okay, these people work so hard on this for a whole year. I know how hard it is to organize something. And then people say, oh, just shut down your conference. Well, that's that's something where those guys are just taking it on the chin for a public good. Maybe the state could reimburse them or something. I was thinking, but now it's so widespread. You multiply that by 1 million. That's what's happening in America, right? So I totally understand where the end lockdowns folks are coming from. The issue is that even though you might risk it to go back to work for your job, you're not going to risk it to just go and like get a drink at the bar. Or if you do, you may not do so forever, right? So let's talk MMT BTC, right? It's funny, last year, or for a while, I've basically been talking about how the title fight of the 2020s will be MMT versus BTC. And I think that's coming even faster than I expected, where we're definitely, whether you call it MMT or not, we are definitely in the time of the unlimited government, right? And that's the opposite, by the way, of limited government, is unlimited government. So you have a government that has no limits on, it can put people under house arrest effectively with lockdowns. It can change prices. It can, shut down your business. It can ban flights. It can print money. It's basically a wartime kind of government, right? The unlimited government. And the thing about MMT is it doesn't make any sense, in my view, if you like in logical terms, okay? And just to articulate what it is for those folks who don't know what it is, modern monetary theory, or MMT, is there's the observation that the state can print money, and that's often accompanied by the recommendation that the state should print money, okay? And it should print money to pay for everything, and that there's no constraint on the state doing this, right? Essentially, like if they're pressed on, oh, won't it cause inflation? They say, well, don't worry. If inflation happens and prices start going up, we'll just raise taxes to pull the money we just printed back out of the economy, right? Now, just to show that I'm not making this up, there's a video that you might be able to link or what have you by I tweeted it a while back, but it essentially shows the MMT folks treating the economy as like a tank of water, and they pump in water and they pull it out with taxes and so on. And this is a very naive view for many, many reasons. One of which is in a time of inflation, if you try to increase taxes, well, people, they've already got lower consumption and they're going to resist that. Number two is the economy is not a tank of water. It's adversarial, right? Like people will respond to incentives. And one of the things they'll do is they'll move their money into BTC or other cryptocurrencies and so on and get out of the tank where, you're printing all this money. And so MMT, it can't be really understood in terms of what its people say, but it can be understood from a different sense, which is, I have a gun, right? MMT is the language of the state, the total state, the unlimited state, which says the state can increase taxes to 99% and expropriate everything you have, right? Because that's what that means. Like print all the money means dilute you down to zero. It's like being able to print trillions of shares on the cap table or what have you, right? And so it means that I can print all this money, and because it's currency within this realm, I can seize any asset of anybody and do so in a quiet and stealth way, right? Because you don't see your percentage of market cap, right? Now, one thing I want to be clear about, it's not as simple as just straight inflation because there's huge deflation occurring in the economy as well. So we're probably going to get something where it's like pandemic deflation, as I mentioned, of all the things people don't want, like concerts go to zero in terms of price or drop substantially. All the things they do want rise in price. Okay. So in one corner is MMT, this is the language of the total state. In the other corner is BTC, which is, maybe the leader of the free world, right? And I think that's a provocative statement, but the U.S. itself is sort of absent globally from the pandemic crisis. It doesn't stand for freedom. Or rather, maybe it does, but it's not like, usually when there's like a flood in some country, you have Marines land and they, hug babies and pose for a photo op, and it's good stuff, right? Like they're moving sandbags. You probably did some of those missions or whatever. And the U.S. is completely absent from the global stage on this. They're not defending other countries because they've been invaded themselves, right? And so who's the leader of the free world? I think it's going to be Bitcoin. Right, Bitcoin is the leader of the free world. Go ahead.
Really, what you're kind of talking about here is MMT is a complete state-initiated process. You devalue the currency. You get people addicted to the state being the savior and having to drive all of the value. And literally, it's like a child and a mother, right? The mother has to take care of the child, or the child doesn't thrive. Bitcoin is some weird way 180-degree difference. And it is coming at it from, in one area, you can print as much as you want. In this one, you can print zero, right? It is completely decentralized.
That's right.
And so I think a lot of people are wondering, okay, I buy the argument that those two worlds are going to coexist for some period of time. Can they coexist forever? Or do they meet in kind of that boxing match in the middle and one has to knock the other out?
So I think that so the analogy I would give is, I think BTC ultimately wins, but it's going to be a giant fight between, think about Facebook before 2016 and then Facebook afterwards. Afterwards, everybody's like, oh my God, this thing is actually extremely powerful. And all these attacks were launched and it's still standing, but it took more fire at that time than it ever had before. Once Bitcoin hits 100,000, I don't know when. Frankly, it could happen in a week from now. It could happen a year from now. It could happen 5 years from now or whatever, right? But eventually it will. Once it hits like 100,000 and, Bitcoin being what it is, it could happen in a day after being nothing for a long time. When it does, and I have no doubt that it will eventually simply because so much money is being printed. When it does, then you're going to get another level of state interest in it in all senses of the term. Some states will actually adopt it as like a gold-like thing. Other states will try to stamp it out, but as long as some states adopt it and the internet doesn't go down, Bitcoin will win.